Hi everybody, thank you very much for joining me. Well, better late than never, I'm here with my Paul McCartney and Wings one-hand clapping review. To cut an extremely long story short, I went away on holiday the day after this came out. When I got back, all the mind game stuff happening meant that this had to just wait its turn basically. But here I am. I've been listening to this a lot since it came out. I've got a full review of all the songs, a review of the album overall, what I think about projects like this compared to getting archive collection releases, and also where you might find some of the songs on here on previous releases. Going to talk about that as well. So this was Paul and Wings going into Abbey Road Studios in August 1974, shortly after Jimmy McCulloch and Jeff Britton joined the band. So they'd recorded Junior's Farm and Sally G about a month before these sessions. So they were still really new to the band, and a lot of these songs would have been obviously very new to them to playing. In fact, quite a few of the songs on this were new to Paul as a live act, because this was one of the first big things really that happened after the Band on the Run sessions, for example. So those songs had never really been played live before. So I've got this on vinyl. Like I say, I'm going to go through every song, but let's just, for those of you that haven't seen it yet, this is some information about the album there on that hype sticker. This is the version that's got the bonus 7-inch single. I'm going to talk about that as well, from when Paul went into the backyard at Abbey Road Studios and just played some songs, him and his acoustic guitar. I've also got the CD version. So it starts with the title track, One Hand Clapping, which I don't think, did we ever hear Paul do this song at any other point? I don't remember that happening. If it did, let me know, because I'd be interested to know that. It's a bluesy jam. I'm going from my notes here, by the way. It's a bluesy jam, fairly unremarkable. Apart from, I think the highlight of this is introducing Jimmy McCulloch and giving him a moment in the spotlight. His lead guitar is probably the most interesting thing on this sort of intro theme tune type song that it is. It then goes into Jet. Now, this is a lively version. Paul sounding great on this, but Jimmy McCulloch again is stamping his authority on this band right from the start. Jimmy sounds great. He's adding all sorts of extra little licks that maybe weren't there in the original studio version, and it sounds to me like Jimmy's sort of saying, "I'm here now, guys. You're going to know about it." Sounds brilliant. Paul's got a really good driving bass line as well on this version that I don't really recall hearing on too many other versions of Jet. That really marches the song along. Soily next. So this is one of those songs that Paul made a great rocker out of this song, and he kept returning to it through the sort of, I'd say the first half of the 70s, but including the 76 Wings Over America tour. It appears on 1972 Wings Over Europe that came out as part of the 71 to 73 archive box set. It's on here, it's on Wings Over America, but of course Paul never actually released a studio version of it on a studio album. Maybe he just didn't feel it fitted anywhere properly, I don't know. But I think the highlight for me on this is Jeff Britton's going for it. It really sort of suits his style. He's got a really strong rocking beat on this, and probably my favourite version of Soily. It then goes into Sea Moon. It's a really relaxed version. I think Linda's sounding good on backing vocals here. But yeah, it is quite relaxed. And then it goes bang, straight into Little Woman Love. Nice energetic version. It's dominated by the keyboards that Paul's playing at the time, but that sounds really nice. We've then got Maybe I'm Amazed. Now, I love this version on One Hand Clapping of Maybe I'm Amazed. And to be honest, Maybe I'm Amazed is my favourite Paul McCartney song of all time. I think it is his number one song, probably even taking into account everything he did with the Beatles, in my opinion anyway. The keyboard that he's using, it's a very basic keyboard sound, but it gives it a sort of a unique vibe amongst the many versions of this song that we've got. There's one keyboard fill in particular, it's just before the second lead guitar break, that I really love, and for such a simple keyboard sound, it sounds so funky. It does this little break that he does. Listen out for it before that second guitar break. Really love that. Jimmy McCulloch doing a great job on lead guitar as well on this version, really nailing those lead parts. Very faithful to Paul's original, but obviously you can tell Jimmy's a fantastic guitarist and really pulls it off well. We then go into My Love. It's a very sort of earnest performance of My Love. Paul really means it, you can tell. Denny and Linda working together very well on the backing vocals on My Love. This is one where Jimmy McCulloch doesn't quite nail it, I don't think. I'm not sure whether had he not learnt it well enough, or was he still a bit unsure of it. But his lead guitar is a little bit reserved and not really. It's certainly not up to the standards of the Henry McCulloch original. I think Jimmy would obviously go on to do it a lot better, but maybe he just didn't have it quite nailed in his brain at this point, perhaps. We then go on to Bluebird, showing another side to the band. There's a real great sort of choppy rhythm guitar style to this, which, is it Jimmy McCulloch? Is it Denny Laine? I'm not quite sure who it is, but whoever is playing it sounds really good. Paul and Denny's sort of vocal interplay during the choruses, absolutely fantastic. Every bit as good as on the Band on the Run original version, so Bluebird sounds really nice. We've then got sort of 3 songs in a row, which feels like this is Paul. Yeah, it's almost like he's letting you into his work in progress. These are maybe songs that he's working on. They're not fully ready yet, but he's just going to give you a little bit of a glimpse of them. The first one is Let's Love. It's just Paul and a piano. It's a lovely little sort of mysterious ballad. It's only a minute long, and of course we never really heard more of the song after that. It's one of those, Paul's probably got hundreds of these songs that he started, he's got ideas of, and maybe nothing ever happened with them after this. This is one of them, and another one is the next song, All of You. Again, just sort of, it's almost like a little fragment, an idea at the moment of what a song might be, but again, we don't really hear of it again after One Hand Clapping, and like I say, Paul must have so many of those songs that we've never heard. Might he still resurrect some of them on new studio albums, perhaps? Who knows? But that certainly feels like it's something he's still working on. And then the third of this sort of trilogy of songs in this part of the album, I'll Give You a Ring. This would come to prominence 8 years later. It was the B-side to Take It Away. But here, it's just Paul sort of playing with the piano. It's a playful little number, Paul and piano. So yeah, it just feels like we're spending a little bit of quality time with Paul while he just introduces us to some of his works in progress of the time. The band are then back. It's Band on the Run, and what I think is interesting listening to this version of Band on the Run is that because this is the first sort of big project since Band on the Run was done, that this will be the first time that this would be sort of played live with a view to presenting it to the world. Obviously, apart from any sort of promo that was done around the Band on the Run album, this is it becoming a live song. It still feels a little bit reserved to me. It's got the good orchestra parts in it, but I don't think it's quite become the epic that it's going to be as a live song. Still feels a little bit reserved, but a nice version. Then they're going to Live and Let Die. This sounds great. Really love this. The instrumental breaks here are epic. They're really going for it. It's about a year after its release by now, and I think Paul knows surely that he's got a stone cold classic here that can be an absolute highlight of big live shows in the future that surely he had in his mind. Of course, it would come to fruition sort of the following year, 75, and then even more so in 76. Paul must have had an idea that this would be a big part of those live shows. Sounds fantastic. We've then got 1985. This is one of the highlights of the album for me. Just Paul on the piano. It's very sparse, but a hard-hitting version. Just Paul on piano, and then about a third of the way through, the backing track from the Band on the Run original kicks in, and Paul continues singing over the backing track. So we get the backing track with a new vocal. And also, this is one of the ones where the video element for this song is a bit more well known than some of the other songs from these one-hand clapping sessions. We see Paul get up from the piano and he's got a microphone in his hand, and it's really rare to see Paul and just a microphone in his hand. It's something that we don't see very often from him through his career, so that's interesting to see. And what I love about this, hooray, we've got an ending to this song that doesn't have the Band on the Run reprise at the end. I've never liked that. So it's really nice to hear that here without that. And then it's a really sort of jarring transition from such an epic end of a song into Babyface. So this was a song that dates back to 1926. All sorts of people, Al Jolson and many others, done versions of this. But it's done as like a fun New Orleans jazz style romp, which I think is appropriate because it was only a few months after these one-hand clapping sessions that the whole band would go off to New Orleans and sort of do a little bit more in that style. So it was good to sort of see them starting that little phase of Wings' career. And the other thing that I think is appropriate to talk about while we're talking about Babyface, but it applies to various other things on the album as well, is that it sort of embodies how all over the place Paul's career was at this time. If you think about this one-hand clapping project and things that had gone on maybe sort of a year or two before with the James Paul McCartney TV special, Bruce McMouse and various other things, Paul was a bit all over the place. He was revisiting that sort of music hall variety element that he did love, probably a little bit more in this phase. And I wonder, I was trying to sort of think of why that is. I think the early 70s in Britain anyway were a little bit crazy and things of some very sort of unexpected genres became very popular. But I just wondered about the fact that Paul was now in his early 30s, obviously hitting 30 in June 1972. And this was a really rare thing for a pop or rock star to be in the 30s. And surely at that point, Paul must have thought, well, you know, I might not be a rock star doing sort of rock type albums for much longer because people don't when they hit 30. And was he sort of starting to think about, well, maybe I'll go into other areas? He talked earlier in his career, in the fairly early 60s, about the fact that he and John might go into musicals or other styles of music. Is this him thinking that maybe surely he's about to hit that point in his career and he needs to start thinking about other things? Or is it just that the early 70s were completely crazy in terms of style? I don't know, but it's very noticeable that Paul was doing that kind of thing a lot more in that period. It then goes on to Let Me Roll It. So this is, again, a bit like Band on the Run. It's Let Me Roll It becoming a live song. And it's a really successful immediate transition to that. The band sound like they've been playing this for years. It sounds fantastic. And Paul's voice is just at its absolute majestic mid-70s best, I think, on Let Me Roll It. Fantastic version. And then into Blue Moon of Kentucky. Another sort of unexpected sidestep here. This has been a bit of a favourite of Paul's to return to over the years. So it's one that again was on Wings Over Europe. We've got this one-hand clapping version. It was on Unplugged, the official bootleg that they did back in 1991. Paul also played it with Ringo and George in 1994 for the Threetles sessions, as they're often known, for Anthology. There's a version of them doing Blue Moon of Kentucky there. So clearly a favourite of Paul's. It's a good up-tempo version, is this. It's played sort of very joyfully, never becomes cheesy. Paul's clearly enjoying playing that song. And then it goes into Power Cut, one of the songs from the medley on Red Rose Speedway. It's quite a funny intro with Paul sort of introducing it in a Scottish brogue. Sounds like a sort of a happy version of Ivor Cutler when he's introducing it. So it's just Paul and a sort of a Wurlitzer style organ. And I like the fact that the end he says, thanks Reg Dixon. If you don't know Reg Dixon, he was kind of like the lead organist at the Blackpool Tower Ballroom for 40 years. And it's nice to get a shout out for the Dixons on a Paul McCartney album. Big up the Dixons. We've then got Love My Baby. Paul and the organ again, sort of again back in that early 70s music hall variety phase that he was in, a bit like I was talking about with Babyface a few minutes ago. We've then got Let It Be, which would have probably been a surprise to people in 1974 if they'd have known that Paul was doing this. It's just a little short snippet. The keyboard that it's played on has got sounds to me like a sort of an accordion setting, which I'm presuming it was rather than an actual accordion, I assume. It's not an entirely serious version, but it's good to hear Paul acknowledging a Beatles song. And I think that quote that's often said about, Paul refused to play Beatles songs for years, I don't think that was really true. I think Paul did actually revisit Beatles songs in that early period, probably quite a lot more than he's given credit for. It's nice to hear him do that. Followed by another one, The Long and Winding Road. It's like a really respectful short version of it, until it very abruptly ends, and it's straight into a sort of a playful blast of Lady Madonna. Paul using a sort of a different kind of rhythm on the piano. And I was thinking about it with this, that I don't think I've ever actually heard Paul McCartney play the piano to Lady Madonna exactly as it was in 1968 on any other version that followed that. It's always had a slightly different sort of tempo or feel to it. He's never really accurately reproduced that piano sound, whether that's deliberate or whether he just found that he preferred other ways of playing it. Don't know. Junior's Farm next. Wow. So for me, this is the absolute highlight of the album, the whole album. I love this. Jeff Britton's drum intro. It is immense. We all love a bit of air drumming, don't we? Don't we love a bit of air drumming? This has already become one of my favourite things ever to air drum to. That intro by Jeff Britton. Absolutely brilliant. Now, I don't know whether it's because this was one of those this was that first song that this version of Wings did with Jimmy McCulloch and Jeff Britton. Does that mean that they're a bit more confident with it? Does it mean that they feel like they own it a bit more? But for whatever reason, this is a fantastic version of Junior's Farm. They give it everything. It's brilliant. Love it. We then go on to what was the B-side of Junior's Farm, Sally G. But this is just Paul this time. Sally G has for a long time been one of my favourite Paul McCartney mid-70s songs. I absolutely love singing along to this song. So this is a more stripped back version, just Paul and his acoustic guitar. It is great to hear an alternate version of Sally G because unless there's an obvious version I'm forgetting, I don't really think I've ever heard other versions of Sally G apart from the original studio version. So although it's great to hear that, I much prefer the studio version to this, but it is nice to have an alternate version of Paul just running through this. Then we've got Tomorrow. Again, this would have been probably quite unexpected as a song for Paul to pick, like nearly 3 years after Wildlife came out. It's a very different arrangement. Now, supposedly, Linda's father, Lee Eastman, had suggested to Paul that he thought that this song would sound very good in a much slower arrangement. So is that why Paul decided to do it? I don't know, but the story goes that Lee had suggested it. And it gives it a massively different feel. It's very sort of melancholic, almost like a sort of another version of Dear Friend, obviously also from the Wildlife album. It's very interesting and it's quite a lovely version. I really like it. Very different though. We've then got Go Now. This is a really sort of welcome version of Denny Lane's Moody Blues classic. The original song, the original Moody Blues version, sounds awful. I mean, it's a great song, but the recording of it, whether it's in the mixing, the actual recording, it's a dreadful recording. So it's nice to have good sounding versions like this and What's on Wings Over America. So it's very welcome. I thought Paul and Linda sound really good on backing vocals through this. They're sort of giving it lots of welly on the backing vocals. Really good. And then we've got Wildlife, the song. Again, probably a little bit unexpected by this era of Paul to still be doing this. It's very faithful to the Wildlife version. It does go off in slightly different directions towards the end, but up until that point, very faithful. If you like Wildlife as a song, then you'll probably like this. If you're not so keen on Wildlife as a song, there's probably nothing here that's going to change your mind. I enjoy the song Wildlife, and this is a really nice version of it. And then the main album closes with Hi Hi Hi. So Jimmy McCulloch brings some new licks to the lead guitar in it. Presumably it's Denny on rhythm guitar. That rhythm drives the song nicely. It is a good performance, but it feels to me like they've just got the brakes on a little bit. There's an end section where they cut loose a bit more and go for it, but most of the song feels to me like there's another 10% there where they could really go for it and let rip, and it doesn't quite get there. But it's a nice closing to the album. So that's the main album, and then we go on to the backyard, the 7-inch backyard. So Paul McCartney goes into the backyard of Abbey Road, microphone in front of him, microphone on his guitar, and records a load of songs, 6 of which made it onto this 7-inch EP. So great for those that managed to get this version. It's a shame that these songs weren't available on the CD version, but thankfully they are now available for streaming, for downloading. So, you know, if you want a CD of it, you can download it and burn your own CD. But 6 songs on here. So the first 3 songs on side A are Paul McCartney songs that he wrote. And then on the other side, it's sort of old classics. First of all, Blackpool. This has been a sort of a mythical song in Paul McCartney's canon. A song that fans know, but we've never really had a great official version of it released. Good to see that put right here. Now, I want to know what you think about the numbers that are in Blackpool. So, Blackpool, 48, 23, 48, Blackpool. What do those numbers mean? I often wondered whether they were the buses that you would take to Blackpool. You know, do you get on a number 48 bus that takes you there? Then do you get on a 23 bus and then do you get a 48 back again? I don't know. Is it something to do with vital statistics of the ladies in Blackpool? Maybe. Not sure. I'm not quite sure what somebody who's 48, 23, 48 would look like. That might be a little bit odd. But what do you think about those numbers? Still, it's good to have that song available at last properly. He then does Blackbird. It's a very faithful version to the 1968 White Album version. Very little difference indeed. So Paul really sort of playing it properly and faithfully and showing us how good he can do that as a live version. We've then got Country Dreamer. We're sort of going back to Band on the Run era here. 2 false starts in this song, but Paul sort of carries on, incorporates them into the intro, so it doesn't distract. It's nice. And this shows Paul's acoustic guitar style off really well, I think. I'm listening to it and thinking, you know, that sounds like 2 guitars to me. Paul can make 1 guitar sound like 2. For that style of guitar playing, that type of song, that type of performance, it was making me think that there is nobody in the world in history ever who I would rather hear singing that type of song in that kind of style. Fantastic. We then go on to the second side. This is more sort of rock and roll classics, songs that Paul loves. Now, first of all, we've got 20 Flight Rock, but slightly confusingly perhaps, it's labelled on here as I'm Too Tired to Rock, which of course is one of the lyrics in 20 Flight Rock, but I wonder whether that was that just a mistake? Was it that whoever was writing these notes on the tape box, whether it be Jeff Emerick or whoever, did they just not know the name of the song and they thought that that's what it was called? Thankfully, on the download version and the streaming version, they've put the title correct and they call it 20 Flight Rock. But anyway, of course, it's the song that got Paul McCartney into the Beatles. So one of the most important songs in Paul McCartney's life, even though it's not one of his. 17 years after he played it to John Lennon in that hall at the Woolton Village Fete. So it's great to see Paul playing a great version again. He's playing it great, singing it really well. So it's good to have a good version of Paul doing that as well. We've then got Peggy Sue. I was so happy when this was announced and the fact that Peggy Sue from this backyard session was going to be on here, because this is a version of the song that I have absolutely loved for about 35 years. Since I first saw the Press TV special, the one that was made for Press to Play in 1986, I probably didn't see that special until about 1989. And they show a little clip of Paul doing Peggy Sue from this very version in really crappy quality. So I'm so happy to have this. I absolutely adore this version of Peggy Sue. It's something that I've tried to sort of replicate on guitar myself many times. Paul's giving it the maximum Buddy Holly sort of vocal affectations. I love it. I cannot tell you how much I love that song. Really happy to have a good quality version of that. And then he goes on to finishes off with another Buddy Holly song, I'm Gonna Love You Too. And you can tell that Paul's got a real affection for Buddy Holly there. It's a fairly short version of it, but Paul plays it very nicely, and you can tell he does a little, oh, Buddy Holly at the end. He loves Buddy Holly. It's his little tribute to him there. So that's the album. I'm going to come on to a few other things about the album in a moment, but what do I think of this as a release? I think it's brilliant. I really do. This to me is essential Paul McCartney. I sometimes get baffled over the last few years by some of the releases that get announced from the Paul McCartney camp. Things like the McCartney 1, 2, 3 box set, the McCartney 3 3rd anniversary. Just this week, a couple of days ago, they've announced Japanese SHM CDs of the first 5 post-Beatles albums. Things like that, I don't really understand the point of them. But then every now and again, something like this, or something like the things that are behind me, which are all things that have been released in the last few years as sort of quite unexpected, but really welcome projects, whether it's Band on the Run Underdubbed, the Amoeba gig, Thrillington, the Red Rose Speedway Reconstructed, the McCartney 3 Imagined. Okay, that's a little bit of a different kind of project, but quite regularly we're getting these things that are really enhancing what we have available officially from Paul McCartney's career. I can't get enough of things like this, things like Band on the Run Underdubbed. Brilliant. Is it a suitable replacement for the Paul McCartney archive collection? Well, probably not, still. It would be great if even greater if these things were coming under the banner of the archive collection. That's, it looks like that's not happening. Is the archive collection dead? We don't know. It's certainly missing presumed dead anyway, until hopefully we get proved wrong, or proved otherwise anyway. So in the meantime, things like this I think are absolutely fantastic. It's obvious that Paul is concentrating a lot recently on the early to mid 70s. Now, whether that's for 50th anniversary copyright reasons or other reasons, don't know. Frankly, don't care. If we're getting things like this, I'm happy. If it is for 50th anniversary reasons, I was trying to think of what might be next. Could it be something like, there was certainly a rumour a little while ago that 1975 Wings Over Australia concert was maybe being prepared for release. Could that be coming next year? Maybe. Or maybe something else. We'll see. But I hope they continue filling in the gaps, those other kind of projects that weren't necessarily studio albums, but things we know are part of the legend of Paul McCartney. Keep them coming. Fantastic. So, that's what I think of the album. I just also wanted to mention about some of the songs on here have appeared elsewhere in the past. So I just wanted to talk about where we might have had some of this other stuff before, how this is similar or different to that. So we've had quite a few things on various archive collections. So for example, Babyface that's on here. Now that was on the Venus and Mars archive collection. It was a different take though that was on the archive collection that had much more of the sort of Dixie jazz style backing. Whereas on One Hand Clapping, that only comes in later in the song. So although you've got it on there, if you've got this, it's a slightly different version that's on One Hand Clapping. We've then got we've got several from the Band on the Run archive set. So Country Dreamer and Bluebird are the same take on One Hand Clapping as what we had on here. I think they sound better on one hand clapping. Everything on one hand clapping has been remixed for this year's release, and I think they've enhanced it. When you compare one hand clapping to the archive versions now, these sound a little dull in comparison, so I think the remix has really helped the sound. But anyway, Country Dreamer and Bluebird, same take that you would have on here. Jet, again, it's on here. Now, it's the same take that's on here, but it sounds so different. What they've done on the one-hand clapping version, for reasons that I don't know, but I don't necessarily disapprove of, they've really cranked up Linda's keyboard part on one-hand clapping. It's really quite low in the mix on this. In one-hand clapping, it is really prominent. I think it helps drive the song. Does that, so I've no issue with that, but it's a little bit of a surprise if you're really used to the Band on the Run version. Let Me Roll It, again, it's on here on the Band on the Run archive version. Same take is on here, but this version misses the counting. There's a short counting at the start of the song. It's on one hand clapping, it's not on here. Live and Let Die is from a soundtrack called The In-Laws, a film, well, it was a movie called The In-Laws. And for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure, I haven't seen the film, so I don't know whether it's used in there, but the version of Live and Let Die is on that soundtrack. It's the same take, but the In-Laws soundtrack lacks all the sort of pre-song chatter, but also it's got a much drier vocal. It's got quite a bit of reverb on the one-hand clapping version. It's a very dry, prominent lead vocal on the In-Laws soundtrack that I think a lot of people might prefer. If you've heard that, let me know whether you prefer that. Love My Baby is back to the Venus and Mars archive, but not quite. It's not on here. But as part of the promotion for the Venus and Mars archive edition, you might remember Paul often used to put a download available on his website in quite poor MP3 quality, to be fair. This was one of them. It was available as a download from paulmccartney.com. It was the same take. It just sounds a lot better on one hand clapping than the download we were given several years ago. Maybe I'm Amazed. So that is on the McCartney archive collection. It's the same take on here as on one hand clapping, but I think again the new remix, it just packs a lot more punch on one hand clapping. Sounds better than I think it does on there. The 1985 again is from the Band on the Run archive collection. It's the same take, but interestingly, the version that's on here has got the Band on the Run outro at the end of the song, whereas I mentioned on one hand clapping, it doesn't. So, little strange. I would suspect, if I had to guess, I would say that the one without the Band on the Run Band on the Run ending is probably faithful to what they made in 1974. Could be wrong on that. And then the last one that appears on an archive collection also is Soily. Again, it's on the Venus and Mars archive. It's the same take on here, but again, I think the new mix just sounds far better. And the way to illustrate that is if you've got both versions, listen to Jeff Britton's drum intro. On here, it's barely there. On the new version on one hand clapping, bang, drum intro really kicks in, sounds superb. So there is quite a few songs that we've had released previously. I think generally that the one hand clapping versions are better. Live and Let Die might be an exception. See what you think on that one. So yeah, I think I've given you my overall thoughts on this. I absolutely love it. I'm really pleased that we've got this. Please, Paul McCartney's camp, can we have more of the same, filling in these gaps? If it could be part of an archive collection, that would be even better. So, better late than never. I've got my one-hand clapping review out. Thanks very much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you soon. Bye.